Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. This is Francesca de Gaspers from SAFCEI. Welcome. Welcome to the meeting. Wonderful to see so many of our old friends here today. I think there's a bit of an echo on the line, but I hope you can all hear me clearly. Welcome to our speakers and welcome also to all our participants. It is really wonderful to have you with us. As you know, this meeting has been organized by our colleague, Gabriel Manyangaza. But as you also know, Southern Africa has been beset with serious energy issues, power cuts, and other problems. And Gabriel, our colleague, we're here in South Africa at the office in Cape Town, and Gabriel is based in Zimbabwe. And we believe he's had power issues this morning. So, I'm just seeing Gabriel has been able to join. That's fantastic. Gabriel, hello. I hope your connection is strong. And I'm going to hand back to you to start us. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Francesca. My apologies. Our internet is playing up today, but now I've got a secure connection. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this meeting, which we believe is a very, very important meeting on the post COP26 discussion and also preparation for COP27. I'd like to welcome all of you, and for the official welcome and the welcoming remarks, I would like to invite now our Executive Director, Francesca de Gaspers, who was already speaking, and for her to take up and welcome all of us. Over to you, Francesca.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm sure you've been having a difficult time to get online. It's so good to see you with us, and thank you for organizing this amazing meeting. You know, I think most people around the world are feeling pretty zoomed out, but we've got a really good attendance this meeting, and that's down to all your hard work and that of the SAFCEI team. So thank you so much. Before I do my welcome, I would like to please ask Sister Letta to open us in a prayer, and then I will do the formal welcome, if that's okay. Sister Letta, are you with us? Are you able to do the prayer now?
Yes, here I am, dear. I'm here. Let us just pause to connect with our beings. We are the children of the universe. We have the right to be here. And therefore we call on the Creator God, the one who created the universe, the one who created us, the one who gave us the intellect and the ability to see and take care of. We therefore invite you, God the Creator, to be with us, all of us. We call you by different names, but all of us honor you, know that you love us, know that you care about us and about everything that lives on this earth. We ask you, the custodians, that you may be with us, that we may follow the examples of our ancient ancestors who took care of your creation, that we too in our little ways, especially now, in the dire need, when the land, the planet has been depleted and degraded, that you give us the courage to rise up and to be counted and to take care of all that you have entrusted to us. We ask all this in your name and the name of the one that you sent to be one of us, so that he may lead us by his example through the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Letta, and thank you, Gabriel.
Amen.
wonderful starting for our meeting. As most of you know, SAFCEI is a regional, we call ourselves Southern Africa, but really we're also East African at the least, a regional faith environment institute. So we see faith and environment as holding hands, a marriage of two involved, entwined issues. So what I would like to do now is to just give you a short welcome and to talk a little bit about why are we having this meeting today. I've thanked Gabriel and my colleagues for setting this up. I want to thank the speakers who have come to be with us today. And I want to thank all of the participants as well. So as you know, the climate change talks have been going on for a long time. And in fact, we're here today to discuss what has been our experience of COP26, the 26th Conference of the Parties meeting under the UN of all the nations to talk about the climate change issue. And there's some things that are fundamentally clear and often get lost in the negotiations. The first thing is that there is a climate debt, a carbon debt owed to Africa. This is about the historic use of carbon. And we often, somehow that gets lost in some of the technical discussions and some of the detail. But really, we must not forget that there is a debt owed, not looking forward, not talking about present, but a past debt. And Africa's development aims, how we choose to develop, whether it's carbon-based or not, that pathway needs to be supported, because the pathway that we would have, that other countries in the North have followed, using carbon, is no longer available to us. So there's a future debt that we sit in Africa, because there's no room in our current oil-dependent economic growth for Africa to develop the way other countries have. Now, I'm not getting into the debate about what is just development. I'm just saying that in point of fact, that opportunity has been lost and is not available to Africa. We also know that access to energy is absolutely critical for development, and it's not happening sufficiently well. In fact, rural African women still are relying on biomass. So the current African consumption of carbon, besides South Africa, is really, and Egypt, who's hosting COP27, is really very minimal. So we're looking at a whole bunch of issues. And when we go into the negotiation spaces, these are some of the issues that we look at. And many of you will know that South Africa was given $8.5 billion at COP26. However, as we say, as people of faith, the devil is in the details. What does $8.5 billion mean, and what does it look like? We know many of the other financial flows out of COPs have been designed in a top-down way, that the funding often isn't new and additional, and that actually it doesn't reach those who need it most. It doesn't reach those rural women who are relying on their forests still, literally eating their environment to feed their families, to send their children to school. And that is why we have a crisis on our hands in Africa. That's a particular African crisis. We need to, once the world gets serious about weaning itself off its carbon addiction, how will we make sure that there's enough resources for Africa in terms of creating a just energy future for us? How will we be sure that we will have energy for those most vulnerable in our communities who we are most concerned about as people of faith? We want to make sure that no one is left behind when we talk about this climate justice, when we talk about carbon justice. What does that look like in reality to those on the ground who aren't able to come to these meetings, who aren't possibly even aware that we're having those discussions? We as people of faith, and those of us who work with us and support us, have a unique position and viewpoint on these issues. And our contribution as people in this region, witnessing what's going on in our region, the devastation that's already happening from climate impacts, like Cyclone Idai in Zimbabwe, and many other droughts, locust plagues, and so on. It's as if something from the Bible is already happening for us in Africa. And what is it that we have as people of faith? we have an empathic position where we see the difficulties. We are able to listen to the cries of the people from the ground. So for us, when we talk about climate justice and when we talk about COP26, it's not just a technical issue. For us, it's the reality of lives already being lost, of hope being taken away from people who may not have the opportunity to speak for themselves. So we need to look at the decisions that have been made at COP26 or not quite made and still need to be looked at COP27, and let us reflect on the impact that that's having in reality on the lives of our fellow citizens in Africa. And what is the link that we can make between development and the issues that are facing them now? Our job, in essence, on this call is to try and make sense of some of those policy and technical issues and really translate it into the reality, the lived realities of many communities across Africa. So we need to figure out what kind of mechanism will reach those most vulnerable. Many of these issues are multi-layered, but we know our buffer zones are disappearing, our forests, our rivers, our lakes. The more depleted they get, the more vulnerable Africa will be to climate change. So I'm not going to go into the technical issues, the financing, the loss and damage, adaptation and mitigation. We're going to be hearing about that from the speakers who follow. I just wanted to just really give us a starting point that SAFCEI approaches the issues from, and this is the lens that we share. You don't have to be a COP26 expert by any means. In fact, hopefully you'll find all the contributions today really just allow you to engage a little bit more into the climate conversations, allow you to understand a little bit more what we're facing when we go to Egypt, who's the next host. So this year, Africa is hosting the COP again. Every 5 years, it goes across the continents. So every 5 years, we're back in Africa, and now Egypt is the host. So there's a particular challenge that we have in Egypt around the kind of government approach that they have towards civil society. We as civil society often are both within the spaces where we're listening to the negotiations as observers, but also outside, protesting with the people who say this isn't good enough. And protests in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh may be a challenge for us. So we need to think creatively about how do we secure our safety? How do we make sure as people of faith that our voices and the voices of those we represent are being heard? So those are our challenges coming up. I'm really excited to now introduce the lineup that we have for this morning. First of all, I'm just going through the order that I have in front of me. We have Tashmica Sharman, and she's from South Africa. She's Hindu, and she'll be speaking to us from her perspectives, looking at disaster management at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and some of the sustainable development work that she does. Next, we have Leonida Odongo. She is Christian. She's from Kenya, and she's a social justice activist, does a lot of grassroots organizing, and has a master's degree from the University of Nairobi, and is currently doing that was her undergraduate. She's currently doing her master's in international conflict management. Then we have Shannon Shaw, and great to see you, Shannon, again. Shannon was very involved in COP26, so he has a unique perspective as the organizer of the director of Faith for Climate. He was extremely engaged in organizing faith communities around the COP, and I hope he's going to give us some very interesting reflections and lessons from that, because he's really been very engaged in this preceding year, because UK was the host of COP26. Then we've got Dr. Vandana Shiva. What an honor, Vandana. I'm so thrilled that you're with us again. I love that you and Gabriel have got your friendship going, and it's just, we're absolutely thrilled to hear you again. The feedback that we had from your last contribution with a SAFCEI event was that you were really changing. Oops, sorry, I just got muted there. I hope you can still hear me. Sorry, I was just introducing Vandana. I hope you can all still hear me. I was just saying, Vandana, that you were changing hearts and minds on our continent last time, and I'm sure you'll do the same for us again today. Valériane Bernard, also so wonderful to have you with us. You are an amazing faith leader from the Brahma Kumari faith who works with the United Nations. Valériane does an incredible work through interfaith work, bringing together different faith leaders in the UN setting, very, very experienced in the COP space, and I'm sure she'll have much to offer us in this space. She is multilingual, so I'm sure she will be able to speak to us in all different languages as needed if you have specific questions for her. And then finally, we have Dr. Helena Wright. Helena is the Policy Director of FAIRR International. Helena's a new partner for us. We're really thrilled to have her come and speak with us. She looks at, it's from a slightly different angle. She's coming to look at the issues from policy solutions around animal agriculture, and she is the Vice President of the Worldwide Fund for Nature. So she will be giving us a little bit of insight into some of the issues around food and climate justice, which I know you all know is Gabriel's particular focus. Sorry, I'm just seeing a message to me. Sorry, Tam, I can't quite see it. I think you're saying that Helena has been replaced. And it looks like potentially we might not be having someone speaking from FAIRR International, unfortunately.
Excuse me, Francesca, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I had sent a message. I'm Vandana Shiva calling. I'd sent a message to Gabriel that I was available for the hour. I have another commitment at 2 p.m. my time. So if you could put me in the earlier bit, I'd be very grateful because I must leave in 35 minutes from now.
With pleasure, Vandana. Well, if that is the case, and I will allow Gabriel to say his order, but I'm very happy to hand over to you. But I'm going to let Gabriel. I'm going to let Gabriel be the director of his meeting. Thank you, Vandana, for letting us know. And it looks like Helena is not with us, so that means we do have more time. And so, with that, I'm going to say welcome again, and yeah, let's get started. That's everyone who's with us for this morning. A very exciting speaker lineup, and I'm just checking that Gabriel is still with us because, as you know, he's having connectivity issues. Yes, he is. Gabriel, I'm going to hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and I continue to welcome and thank everybody who is on this call. As Dr. Vandana Shiva has actually asked us, we would give her the go-ahead. In our preparation, we would have wanted her to wrap up things, but because of a further commitment, we would allow her to proceed and make a contribution. We had COP26, and what we would want in the United Nations Framework for Climate Change Convention. And the question that we would want Dr. Vandana to talk about is, did it do enough to respond to the climate emergency? Would have wanted this to come right at the end as a wrap-up, but Dr. Vandana would now invite you to speak to us in this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesca and Gabriel. And what kind of time did you want me to take? 5 minutes, 8 minutes, how much, 7 minutes?
I mean, you can take 20 minutes.
No, 20 minutes is too much given the amazing lineup of speakers. So first, thank you to you all for bringing the faith groups together. And I want to thank Sister who opened the prayer. I really feel that that is the issue. Anything less than that is climate injustice. And I have watched how since the first meeting in Rio and the climate treaty, we recognize that the biodiversity agreement, the Convention on Biodiversity, and the UN framework of Convention on Climate Change were totally interconnected. Because the science taught us, and all our knowledge taught us, and all our faiths taught us that The earth, as a living system that has made herself a mother, a home, has created the conditions for life on earth and has given a place for our species to be part of that. Now, the Earth's climate used to be, the climate problem is not a problem. The climate is part of the beautiful relationship of the biosphere with the atmosphere. And the Earth reduced her carbon dioxide through living processes in the biosphere and photosynthesis from 4,000 parts per million down to 270 parts per million. She took the temperatures 290 degrees down to 13 degrees. Of course, with colonialism and Francesca's mention of the debt, both the ecological debt to the planet, the ecological debt particularly to the people of Africa, but across the colonies, basically fossil fuels started to become the instrument for colonialism to move it faster and move it wider. And I think part of the climate debt is just because fossil fuels had allowed the internal combustion engine to steal all of the textile production from the rest of the world and put it in two towns in England, Lancashire and Manchester, and coal-fired these plants, but remove the work of the Africans on the cotton plantations where they were taken without their permission. You would not have those mills running. The real production was the production of the African slaves in the cotton plantations. But part of the way the fossil fuel economy, the colonial economy redefined the economy is it made the resources of the South and the work of all of us as if it is zero value. And so you build a whole edifice where those who steal, those who destroy are defined as creating value, whereas those who sustain and maintain are treated as if they do nothing. Why is COP26 a failure at this time? A worse failure than all the other COPs before? And why must it be corrected by the Voice of Africa, not only within COP27, which will be a limited COP? I'm telling you because I studied the forces that are shaping the United Nations now. The UN used to be one country, one vote. That's how we got the climate treaty together. That's how we got the Convention on Biodiversity together. That's how we got the various food summits together. The food summit was hijacked by Mr. Gates. COP26 was hijacked by the billionaires. All the reports are there. How many private jets were there? And of course, the formal declarations themselves have inadequacy. But it's the side declaration that the billionaires are making that the real place to watch. That's the real place to watch because that's where the agenda goes. So in the formal declaration, it's interesting, we know fossil fuels are all the fossil fuels. The coal, which was the first, but they're also gas, which is now worse than coal from all the ecological audit, and oil. The final declaration only had coal. Phasing out coal, not phasing out fossil fuels. But we have no reason to continue with a 200-year mistake, a colonial mistake, of digging up 600 million years of the Earth's fossilization of a living matter and turning living carbon into dead carbon, and then burning up every year large amounts of that fossil carbon. And Francisca, I do think part of what we need to do as part of a decolonization discourse is not talk about carbon as one. There's living carbon, which is the photosynthesis that takes the carbon dioxide, turns it into plants and food and fiber through the living molecule of carbon, the carbohydrate. There'd be no life without living carbon. And then there's the dead carbon, which we should never have touched and we should still leave underground. Every movement of the world, whether it's movements in Africa or it's movements in the United States and Canada and Ecuador, no matter where you are, or movements in Australia against the big giant mine, all of these are movements of people saying, leave it underground. We don't need fossil carbon. We lived without fossil carbon until 200 years ago. How can we wipe out 200,000 years of our evolution? How can we wipe out 60,000 years of farming in Australia and managing forest fires? How can we wipe out 10,000 years of farming in India? How can we wipe out 10,000 years of farming in China, Africa, Latin America? So what are the mistakes that have been made? And they're not accidental, they are actually a continuation of colonialism. Creating the problem of climate damage was carbon colonization of the atmosphere. But worse, the false solutions that were offered in COP are part of that colonization too. So the first thing that was done was a separation. We had the living earth as part of biosphere and atmosphere as one interconnected whole. It's one Gaia, one Pachamama, one living earth, as Sister talked about. We are one earth. The biosphere was forgotten, the living earth was forgotten, her regenerative potential was forgotten, and we only had fossil carbon dictating everything. The mind, fossilized mind. The heart, fossilized heart. And worse, an economy that is killing the earth, killing creative work, destroying ecosystems, because long before you have residues going up into the atmosphere, that same process has destroyed the forests. That same process has disturbed the river. That same process has desertified the land. The second was, instead of addressing these broken relationships and broken cycles and healing the earth, which is our work, and I do hope that the South African faith communities will prepare an independent, report for COP27, the healing of Africa, the healing of the planet. I'm looking at all your speakers, and I'm just thinking of the fact that you have a special place. Why do you have a special place? Because a large part of the world was colonized, but Africa was colonized through two patterns that make it unique. One is the place where separation was institutionalized as apartheid, as superiority, as domination. You are separate, apartheid, separateness. And if we are facing a problem today, whether it be in climate change or biodiversity erosion or hunger, or take anything, it's about a new ecological apartheid. We are separate from the earth, and the earth belongs to the rich. That's exactly what happened in South Africa. You know how the Africans lost their land, but because the Europeans didn't know how to farm out there, so they took the Indians. Slavery was by then illegal, so they took them as indentured labor. They took them as traders. They took them as professionals, like Gandhi went as a lawyer, as a professional, thrown out of the first-class compartment in Pietermaritzburg, and it woke him up to racism. So in the process, look at your speakers. And I'm sorry I'll miss you, but I had a prior commitment. I'm looking at all your backgrounds. You're from all parts of the world. You're from all the faiths of the world. And so Europe came to Africa, created apartheid. In the process, it also created all the free labor that would make the empire and the colony work. But in the process, you have the unity of faiths to work in solidarity, not just representing the voice of Africa, but representing the voice of humanity. All the descendants of the Indians who are in South Africa today are a voice of India. All the descendants of the Chinese, all the descendants of the Malaysians and Indonesians, because when the Dutch first colonized Indonesia, they were going around the Cape, basically, and the first people they brought there was the Indonesians. So you have a fascinating place, and you can repair the broken humanity, and you can repair our broken relationship with the earth. The second thing that went wrong in COP was not only did they miss all the other fossil fuels and only talked about phasing out, when we have all the proof, that's the work I've done over these last 25 years, that when you shift from fossil fuel-based chemical agriculture, which is 50% of the greenhouse gas problem, you actually do not just avoid the problem, you don't just mitigate, you actually heal, because you pull down the carbon dioxide, you work according to the ecological laws of working with photosynthesis, working with biodiversity to draw down and do what the earth did, cool the planet by increasing life, not by doing geoengineering and blasting pollutants. Please look at the sky and see the lines of pollutants they're putting up. It's called geoengineering, favorite project of Mr. Gates and of DARPA, the Defense Research Agency of America. So if you notice, one of the most important fossil fuel gases, nitrous oxide that comes from industrial agriculture, was totally missing in the COP26 debate. It is 300 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. So if you're looking only at climate, you should be worried about it. But that same carbon dioxide, that same nitrogen fertilizer has already caused problems in the manufacture, has already used fossil fuels to make it. Worse, the soils that use chemical fertilizers are dead soils. They kill all the soil organisms. And even worse, the runoff is coming to the water bodies and creating dead water, dead zones, wherever there's fertilizer runoff. And I know, I started working on agriculture in 1984 when Punjab erupted in violence. And I said, I must understand why this land, which got, Nobel Prize was given to the Green Revolution, and why is the violence? Why is the story not hanging together? And I did the study. And since that day, I have basically followed the path of non-violent farming, which we learned from our indigenous cultures. We have farmed for 10,000 years, only through non-violence. But now, of course, you have the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, bringing fertilizers. Mr. Gates says Africa needs more fertilizers, but African soils will be destroyed. What Africa needs is more organic matter. Africa needs more biodiversity, some of it returned to the soil. And I think the fates can do a tremendous job with this. So these were the things that disappeared. There was a mention of methane, but the interesting thing is Mr. Gates in his book, How to Address Climate Catastrophe, has suddenly started blaming cows. Jesus was born in a manger with cows. They weren't emitting methane. Methane is a result of putting animals in factory farms and feeding them a diet that doesn't belong to animals, which are herbivores. They should be eating grass and herbs. Feeding them GM soya bean intensive feed is the reason there is methane. Putting them in huge amount of concentration is the reason the K4s are a big source of emission of that horrible gas. Ordinary free-range cows across Africa, the cows of the Maasai, are not methane emitting, polluting, stinky animals. So I do feel we need to revisit. We're living through a time where the billionaires can speak rubbish, undo all our faiths, undo all our teachings that greed should be avoided, and they're making greed good. Care should be cultivated, they're making care illegal. So we do need to have the intelligence that we have received and the grace we have received from our faith to look at the billionaire-funded fabrication of how the earth works, how other beings work, how human life works, and what a good life is. Quickly, the four concrete false solutions that are being offered, and the big money behind it, every newspaper's behind it, all of the BBCs are behind it, all of the CNNs are behind it, and that's why our faiths have to be our anchor in this time, where the dominant media is speaking falsehoods. First, If the climate problem is that we put pollution into the atmosphere, created a greenhouse gas layer, which then blocks the heat from escaping, and pollution is the problem of climate change, would you say add more pollution be a solution to climate change? No ordinary human being with common sense would say that. But Bill Gates has big projects on geoengineering, on, they call them solar engineering. Solar engineering, you want to engineer the sun now? But the sun's sunshine is the gift that makes life on this planet. Without the sunshine, this would be a dead planet. We wouldn't be able to have the green leaves that give us all life on Earth. Second, food is the problem. Got to finish off all agriculture, except industrial agriculture, producing raw materials for lab food, for crops producing protein and the raw materials being then modified in labs to make fake meat, fake milk, fake fish, fake everything, just because then you can have patents. Like I started my work on refusing to accept engineering of seed and owning of seed as an invention of the corporations. And so we receive the seeds from the creation. These seeds are a gift we must protect. They are not inventions of the Monsantos. Well, now the Gates and the Silicon Valley tech giants want us to believe that food is an invention they give. And I refuse to accept that this beautiful daily prayer of give us this day our daily bread will be reduced to a prayer to Silicon Valley giants who became trillions of dollars richer while they locked all of us into our homes and online for schools and everyone. Look at the money they made. Look at the money they made. You know, just sitting $3.5 trillion more by locking everyone into where they could make money. Bad enough everyone's having to sit in front of screens. But I refuse to allow the sacred bread to become a controlled, patented commodity that spreads disease and that fake food is offered as a climate solution. Gates even has a patent on, and he's funding, breast milk made artificially in lab. He's saying breast milk is a danger to the climate. A mother, you know, Mary feeding baby Jesus is a climate disaster. But fake milk in the lab is a climate solution. So we need to go very much into the basics. Third, carbon capture. $1 billion carbon coal plant and $1 billion carbon capture. Huge amounts of steel, huge amounts of energy, highly inefficient, 15 trillion they're looking at. It came out in the whole COP discussion. But the worst is net zero. People think net zero is about avoiding pollution. Gates has said it very clearly in his book, How to Avoid Climate Catastrophe. He has said, net zero is not about reducing our pollution, but it is about finding new markets to offset our pollution. So I want to end by two things you really need to look at in the lead up to COP27, particularly as Africans from South Africa and Africans from the faith community, where every tradition comes in. Every tradition says we are one Earth family. We are part of the beings of life. We are not masters, we are not owners, we are not conquerors. We are part of the relationship with other beings. Net zero basically is we'll continue polluting. And in this period, I think it's the last decade of lots and lots of big giant solar farms and giant wind farms, people are thinking, oh, renewable energy is taking over. 3 times higher use of fossil fuels at the same time. So they're not reducing fossil fuels. And definitely in agriculture, it's about more fossil fuel use. Worst, they're now talking about half for nature. And you would think, oh my gosh, they're going to leave the planet. 25% of the land is in the hands of indigenous people. That land holds 85% of the biodiversity of the planet. Wherever there's a biodiversity, there's a healing of the planet taking place. No, the solution they have in net zero is, they announced it, Mike Carney, who I've debated, who was the Bank of England chief, and he's now the main person for the finances in the UNFCCC. What is his work? His work is how to have the BlackRocks and the Vanguards and the Wall Streets make money out of nature's ecological goods and services. Whatever indigenous people have protected, a forest here, a river there, that has already 1 month before COP26 been opened up to a new financial wing called natural asset management companies. These companies will own all the ecological services. You might be a community protecting your forest, but if that company has invested in that land, every function of the forest will belong to them, and you will become criminals on your own land. The river starts to belong to them. You will not be able to go harvest water. We have had to fight some of these battles in India with the privatization of river. So we're in a new challenging time, but I think this is the time. Their fates are particularly important. As Francesca said so clearly, we are not, our minds are being shrunk to narrow and narrow and narrow gymnastics of fake auditing systems, fake accounting systems. They're looking at 20,000 trillion of money to be made from nature. 20,000 trillion. But if every drop of water is owned, if every leaves photosynthesis is owned, every bit of carbon in the soil is owned and traded in Wall Street as an asset, people will not have access to anything for living. Other beings will not have access. That's why, from faith, I request you prepare a approach paper for COP27 from the perspective of the colonized worlds to whom there's an ecological debt, from the perspective of the diverse faiths, so that we bring together the solidarity and the healing of the earth. We have the potential. Our faith has given us that potential. Christ, through the moneylenders' desks, we are in the middle where the moneylenders are running the world. It is time to throw those desks away and turn to the earth and say, here we are, we'll take care of you. And to our faiths, we will live according to the teachings that our founders have given us. Thank you so much. I'm with you in solidarity. I will have to physically leave in a little time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vandana, for that inspiring talk. And it opens up our minds in a different way. Thank you very much. I want you to stay on maybe just for 5 minutes, if we could. And since you'll be leaving, to have people who might want to ask questions for clarity, and we'll just open it up to all of us. For those that would want to speak, may you please indicate by showing your hands. I see Francesca. Please go ahead, Francesca.
Gabriel, thank you so much. I was actually just clapping. I was doing an online clap. But Vandana, yeah, I just also, seeing as I have the floor, I will ask you a question. What is your view?
Begin. If the SABC people need any technical support, can you mute, please? That I can help.
Can you mute? Thank you. Sorry, Vandana. When you look at COP27 and the plans for Egypt, do you have a particular view on some of those streams that are coming up that are new, which are looking at things like loss and damage, so current impacts that climates are having on communities? I have a sort of a mixed feeling about it. I know that it's really important to get monies to support communities who are vulnerable, but the money never seems to reach the people who need it. And so I have a sort of very ambivalent feeling about the UNFCCC. I think we need to be there, we need to witness it, we need to engage, but at the same time, I don't believe it's the solution for us. And I've been hearing you say that, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you thought about this issue of loss and damage. How do we get reparations for these communities who are becoming climate refugees? We're seeing it right across Africa. There's a lot of conflict already in terms of climate impacts, and it's a big crisis for us.
Yeah, so the first thing we have to avoid is having this invisibilization. Yeah, we've just had the latest report of the climate and about, India will lose 35 million along the coastline as refugees. And I think one thing it would be important, given that we are watching every day the refugees from Ukraine. Of course, we are also seeing the unequal treatment for those who became refugees with a little bit of color and pigmentation in their skin. And somehow it's supposed to be a disadvantage. The Africans were troubled and Indians were troubled. But the kind of reception that the Ukraine crisis has given to refugees is the kind of reception all of humanity needs to be getting ready for, because we're going to have more and more and more climate refugees. And this, again, will not come through the negotiations of the UN, which at this point are really not, if you look at how frustrated the governments themselves are, they have no power right now. And I use the word carbon colonization as reducing everything to dead carbon, continuing to use dead carbon, and then taking your land and your river for carbon trading and carbon offsetting and carbon sinking. Amazing language is being created. Given that that's what's happened, Bolivia in the COP, representing large numbers of companies, said this is carbon colonization. So I would say you must read the marginal voices of the governments so that you can work with them in COP27 and strengthen them. But second, you can, yes, the polluters must pay. That was their obligation. That is why we have the fund. They have not paid yet. The 40 billion is the pathetic amount. They were supposed to give 100 billion. My country loses 100 billion damages every year. Every year. The second thing that we have to watch out is we've all lived through IMF and World Bank conditionalities. They force us to take loans for things we don't need. Big dams, big highways, green revolution, chemicals. And then we're in debt. They say structural adjustment, change your agriculture, get rid of your small farmers, privatize your water. Structural adjustment has always worked for the old colonizers who come today as the new liberators. I think it's extremely important to recognize that much of the money for adaptation will come with conditionalities. We'll give you a little bit, but you'll have to do this and this and this, which will then get locked into the net zero carbon trading mechanism. And that's where we have to learn our experiences with the World Bank, IMF structural adjustment and say, your actions of damage have harmed these farmers, these fishermen, these pastoralists. This is a direct cause and effect relationship. You ought to directly just do reparations. And I think we need to be innovative. We underestimate how big the faith groups are. If we organize, we shouldn't be appendages to a hijacked UN system. We should be the leaders of global transformation. And that means the language of liberation should come from the faith institutions. Can you imagine if every church said, we will have a refugee fund and we will share it to the mechanisms of faith, which are far more honest than the mechanisms of greed and conditionality. Show me a place where, when a cyclone damage happens, the Ramakrishna missions are there with deep honesty. The Brahma Kumaris, they are there. I know they are part of your session. So faiths create an inner anchor of honesty because you do the work because it's the right thing to do. And because of that, we must elevate the unity among faiths to work for our one earth and one humanity, but use the amazing decentralized management systems they have. They have temples everywhere, they have churches everywhere, they have mosques everywhere. Let those become mobilizers of a vision for another world, but mobilizers of helping people who are suffering the damages of climate change.
Thank you very much, Vandana, for that question. I have another question, which is in the chat from Teto Lungu, which says, can the faith community challenge the money lenders and let communities lead their own lives from their own naturalized settings?
Yeah, you know, I think part of, I've worked on ecological issues now for 50 years. I have watched self-sufficient communities be made dependent. I have watched rich, brilliant tribal women dressed in silver from top to bottom. And the same is for Africa. And they're selling and pawning their silver for a sack of urea because the propaganda is so intense. I don't want to see a future where the money lenders and the money makers tell you can't live without borrowing from us. And there's a whole new, there's a big great reset and a book by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And they said, you will own nothing. You'll be happy. Now, we in Africa and India and other places, we did not own things privately, but we had the commons. And the commons allowed us to sustain ourselves. So to not own things in a private way does not mean we are dispossessed of the earth's gifts to sustain our lives, to farm, to fish, to build our homes, to quench our thirst. Those basic, a sister said it in a beautiful prayer, we are on this earth, we are beings of the earth. As beings of the earth, we have a right to live on this earth in peace. That is the prayer in every faith. So yes, I think if we can become creative from the bottom up to say this money game is what is now holding the future of the world at ransom. It is what hijacking the climate summit. But was they're looking for huge money to be made from climate capture, from capture of our imagination. And they set such a short deadline. They said by 2030, this agenda will be over. People will own nothing. They'll have no homes. Everything will be an asset to be controlled by the financial giants like BlackRock. So number one, yes, turn to your local resources, protect them. And Gandhi learned his civil disobedience in South Africa when the new laws of division and separation were being put in place, 1906, the law against the Indians. And he did a satyagraha from 1906 to 1911, till that law was withdrawn. He called it the satyagraha, the fight for truth, the force of truth of our being, children of one planet, one humanity. And our satyagraha, our civil disobedience now is against any action that destroys the earth, any action that deprives any child, any person of their basic right to live, to breathe, to eat, to have energy, to drink water. Simple, basic things. The earth is for all. Protecting the earth for all is our duty. Our faiths tell us that. And yes, the money lenders must go.
Many thanks, Dr. Shiva, for all of those responses. And I think you are zeroing in on the fact that we need to let the natural take its course and do the right thing. It has the knowledge, it has the experience. As Francesca would say, that experience, that learning that has gone on for all those years will be coming to use. Thank you very much, Dr. Shiva. We would want you to come again some other time so that we may
I'm there, and lots of work to be done. But the beauty is, it's all in our loving hands and our loving hearts. Yeah, we can't say no to the money because together we can find the solutions.
Thank you very much. Now, in the interest of time, we want to move ahead and also have the other speakers coming in on board, and we do send our applaud to Dr. Shiva. Now, I would want to invite Leonida Odongo to come in and give us the perspective on adaptation in Africa, looking specifically at the issues that surround the NDCs. Leonida, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I hope you can be able to hear me. I have a request. Is it possible to show my slide? Because I want to share the realities of the African continent. You can hear me?
I can hear you, Leonida. I think the tech made you one of the people who can be able to share. So please go ahead.
I won't be able to share it from my end. I'm just requesting if you could share it from your end, please. Because I'm actually using a phone and not the laptop. Yes, kindly. So I want to talk about the happenings in the African continent, and of course, linking my presentation with the latest IPCC report, which actually shows that Africa is one of the continents that's going to be adversely affected by the negative impacts of climate change. For example, rising cyclones, rising speeds of wind, increased droughts. And these are things that we're already seeing within the continent. For example, you saw what was happening in Mozambique as a result of Hurricane Idai. And of course, we've had earth tremors in Kenya, people dying of flooding. And sadly, is that the sad fact is that the people who are most affected are people who can't actually be able to cushion themselves from the negative impacts. We've seen, for example, the aspect of fall armyworms affecting the continent. We've seen desert locusts in Kenya. There were so much losses, especially for farming communities. And sadly, these are people who don't have means or systems are not in place within these countries to push on such people. And of course, linked to the negative impacts of climate change, we're also seeing a lot of conflict. Right now, as we speak, in a place called Baringo in Kenya, there's a lot of banditry, and this is a resource-related fight over natural resources, and people are dying every day because of banditry. And of course, this is bringing climate refugees. We're having women living in IDP camps, and of course, it has implications for children going to school. So when we talk about climate change within the African continent, we're also talking about the intersectionality of climate injustice with other injustices. For example, right to food, right to education, right to health, because people are, it's actually survival. People don't know about tomorrow, don't know whether you're going to be attacked. And during these banditry episodes, what happens is that people are losing cattle, they're losing goats, and these are sources of livelihoods for these specific communities. And if you look at the realities, for example, for instance, if I talk specifically about indigenous people as one of the groups that are adversely affected, we find that there's a lot of injustices happening to these communities, and you can just give me a minute. I send my presentation, just a moment. Then I will, just give me a minute, please.
You cannot understand that unless you get this. What do I
Leonida is setting up. We can actually keep on asking questions that are meant for Dr. Shiva, then we'll be forwarding them to her so that we can also have a response on them. So for those who might still have questions, please do forward them into the chat box, and then we can share with Dr. Shiva for responses. Hello, Leonida. Is it possible that we can have somebody else going ahead with the presentation? Then once we have sorted out the technicals, we will give you an opportunity.
I've already shared it. I can go on kindly.
Okay, please. Okay, you may proceed.
So if we look at, for example, if we link climate change to food injustices, we find that the number of hungry people, for instance, in the continent is rising, and this is also happening in places such as Asia. There's a rise in malnutrition. There's also the rise in techno-fixes, and we are seeing this, for example, in genetically modified cowpeas being pushed in Nigeria. We have GM being pushed in Kenya, GM cassava. We also have BT cotton being pushed. And one thing that really tells us that GM is not working. There's somebody who was given a hat, a genetically modified hat that was got from a pig, and he actually only survived for 2 months and he passed on. So that really tells us the uncertainty when we're talking about genetic modification. And this is something that is being pushed as part of climate solution and as part of addressing food insecurity. And of course, there is also the criminalization of practices. For example, saving seeds for farmers. We have a lot of legislations that are coming up that have punitive clauses. And this has implications, for example, in terms of farmers growing their own food, because we know smallholder farmers are actually the ones that are feeding the world and not corporations. But as Dr. Vandana Shiva confirmed and reminded us that corporations are thriving because they have money, and of course they can buy off different governments and push their legislations. For instance, if you look at Africa right now, there is a push through the African Union for harmonization of seed-related legislations, and this has implications because with the criminalization of various age-related sharing of seeds, for example, which is cultural, because in Africa, seed and food is not just food to fill the stomach, it has cultural connotations. For example, when during marriages, people are given seeds as a symbol of life. During burials, there is feasting to celebrate life. So within the African traditions, we look at food differently, not as commodities. And of course, there is the aspect of another full solution that is really coming up is agribusiness. And this is being pushed to give, for example, job opportunities to young people. But of course, what we need to remember is that with these agribusinesses, there is push for consolidation of farms. And this is leading to land grabs. We've seen multinational corporations taking away land, for example, in countries such as Uganda, in a place called Chiriadondo. And this is, you're being evicted at you're being evicted at gunpoint in terms of your land being taken away by force. And of course, we've seen multinational corporations are really pushing through lobbying governments in order to pass legislations that are supporting, for example, genetically modified organisms. And there's a lot of money being invested in this. And we're seeing also this happening in climate smart, they call it climate smart agriculture, when in reality it's actually destroying lives and destroying economies. And if we look at the intergovernmental panel on climate change and link that to the latest report and link that with the African continent, what we are seeing is that, of course, there's going to be a lot of devastation in terms of the negative impacts of climate change. We have loss of lives. For example, we have, to date, there are people who are still living in IDP camps as a result of not being resettled. And of course, there's aspect of the spread of waterborne diseases. And the IPCC report also tells us that global warming is going to affect Africa's food production by between 10 to 20%. And in addition, we're also seeing dangers, increase in climate-related disasters. For example, earth tremors. We had people dying in the Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of volcanic eruptions. And these are all coming because of negative impacts of climate change. And if we ask ourselves, for example, what are the issues when we talk about COP26? And of course, this has implications for COP27 in Egypt. And of course, this is, we call it an African COP. So we're looking at what is going to happen to the African continent and what issues are they going, given that they're seeing the negative impacts of climate change. What is the world going to negotiate, and what decisions are going to come out of Egypt, given that it's happening in Africa, where the bulk, one thing is that the contribution of Africa as a continent to global emission is very low, but the negative impacts that we are feeling as a people is quite devastating. Of course, the aspect of carbon shares and climate fair share, we're seeing that there is no equal responsibility in terms of addressing the global warming and climate-related devastation. Global North countries continue to pollute, and they're coming up with devising different ways of duping communities that if we do carbon offsets, if we do come up with geoengineering, this is actually going to solve the climate crisis. And of course, if you look at, there is the imbalance in terms of contributions, because you find that countries in the global north, including China, are really contributing to the pollution, but you find that the responsibility, the bulk of the devastating impact is actually happening to Africans. And there is also the continued push for dirty energy. We have countries are still mining coal, and as we know, coal is one of the main pollutants. And of course, this is also linked to other extractive. We've seen that there is an oil pipeline that is coming within the East Africa region. And of course, this will have implications, loss of land. There is preference for profit at the expense of vulnerable groups who form the bulk of the population in Africa. And of course, if you look at the international financial institution, as Dr. Vandana also said, they are pushing for funding what communities don't need. For example, funding extractives that actually result into loss of land. They are funding plantations, in the for biofuels, and this is leading to evictions of communities and indigenous people. Like right now, we're having there is a challenge in Ngorongoro crater, Ngorongoro area in Tanzania, where the indigenous people, the Maasai community, are being evicted to pave way for conservancies. We're also having the problems of the Sengwer community in Kenya, in a forest called Embobut. They are being evicted because of a World Bank funded natural resource management project. And this is a community that has stayed in the forest for over 300 years. They have their forest protocols that are actually supportive of environmental protection, but they're being accused of being the ones who are destroying the environment. And of course, in relation to this, they are also, apart from the eviction, there's also the aspect of ethno-genocide. They're losing their culture because some practices, their naming system is related to the forest. They name according to the forest, but now when they're evicted to new communities, they actually get affected even mentally. Some of them are getting into commercial sex work to survive. These are things that were never heard of in this particular community. And of course, they're getting assimilated into other communities. And with assimilation, what happens is that they're losing their distinct identity as the Sengwer people. And of course, this is not only happening for the Sengwer, but other indigenous people across the African continent. And another solution that has been pushed, for example, is the issue of technology. That is, technology is going to address the climate crisis. And of course, this is paving way for increased geoengineering, as I shared before. There is a push for BT cowpea in Nigeria. And this is Nigeria, as we all know, is Africa's most populous nation. And just imagine the livelihoods that are going to be affected. And also look at the indigenous varieties that are going to be destroyed, especially when there is contamination with genetically modified organisms. And sadly, you find that these multinational corporations, they never tell farmers that the seeds that they sell in the agrovet actually have a Tashmica gene, which actually means that it has a lifespan. So what happens is that farmers continue buying, continue lining the pockets of the multinational corporations, but they don't have, when their crops don't grow, don't germinate, there is nobody that cushions them from this negative impact. And of course, that is why we need to build resilience through agroecology. Agroecology can actually result into bringing back the diversity that is lost. What we are seeing today, for example, the COVID pandemic, it has a link to loss of biodiversity in that pathogens no longer have their direct host. So what do? They come into human beings. And of course, when you look at movement is a practice, and it's also a science. So it can actually address some of the challenges that are being brought about by climate change. For example, on diversity, through intercropping, you're able to bring back diversity on your land. Through practices, for example, soil testing, farmers can actually understand why their soil is losing fertility. And of course, with agroecology, it's cheap because you use the locally available materials. For instance, you use manure from your cattle. You use your manure from your cattle as compost, and you don't have to go and buy manure, for example. And in the African context, you find that our cattle are natural cattle that feed on grass. They're not, they don't feed on lab manufactured stuff. So with agroecology, you can actually bring back the life. And of course, given that the bulk of the farmers in Africa are poor, you find that when they utilize agroecology, they can actually be able to reap benefits. And right now we can link the rising cases, for example, of non-communicable diseases, cancers and obesity are linked to the type of food that we eat. And if we practice agroecology, we can actually be able, we're assured of eating healthy food, and also assured of building the rural economies, especially in terms of food production. What are some, for example, of the pushback that we can adopt in terms of addressing the interconnectivity between climate change and food production? One is, I can say, is globalization, taking in-country experiences to global spaces. For example, if you look at fisherfolk community, for instance, there's a interrelationship between lack of fish stocks and sexually transmitted fisherfolk communities. Culturally, women are not allowed to fish. So what happens is that they have to depend on men to get them fish. Women are exchanging sex for fish, and this is something called jaboya within the Lugo community. And this has implications, for example, because you find women infected with the HIV. It has economic implications because when the women whose fish do not have fish stocks, it means that they have to depend on men for fish. And of course, this sexual transaction, not only, sorry, I can shift. Can I, okay, let me shift. What I was saying is that, let me move to another place. Sorry. What I was saying is the sexual transaction does not end when you get fish, because women through and through stories and realities, and bringing like fisherfolk to national meetings, for example, the Climate Action Week, United Nations Environmental Assembly, for them to speak, because you'll never hear of, for example, realities of fisherfolk, such incidences of sexual transaction for fish being discussed at international meetings. They're only discussing how much money are we going to allocate to climate smart agriculture. And I think that we do as we organize community dialogues on climate change, document community stories, but also bring policymakers on board so that they can understand the decisions they make at level, at the grassroots, at the national level, even globally back in these countries, they have implications for local communities. Thank you very much. And you'll be sharing my slide. I already sent it as email. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonida, for those insights, and also the recommendation for us to do those things that would help us to push back on the issues that are affecting us. Do we have any questions that some people might have, would want to quickly ask Leonida, but she is on the call. We can wait until maybe we have the finalize all the 3 remaining presentations, and then we can have all the questions coming in through at once. Thank you for that, Leonida. You'll be on the call, so would be also referring some of the questions that will be coming through to you. And now I would want to invite onto the stage to speak Tashmica Sharma to actually address us. And Tashmica is from South Africa, from the UKZN. Thank you very much, Tashmica.
Namaste, namaskaram, vanakkam, salaam alaikum to everybody. I'm Tashmica Sharma and Sunny Bonani from South Africa and KwaZulu-Natal. Gabrielle, I remember interacting with you, and I'll be speaking on Hinduism and its connection with climate change and nature. Can I share my screen? I have a presentation. Thank you. I'll just share it now. All right. Okay, sorry, just to give me 1 minute. Something seems to have gone wrong. Okay, so it should be coming up. Okay. Can we see it? Okay, can everybody see you can see my screen, Gabriel?
Yes, we can see it. You can continue.
Okay, thank you.
We are seeing it.
Okay, perfect. So the presentation, I just wanted to say on behalf of the South African Hindu Mahasabha, thank you to SAFCEI for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to be looking at the inextricable connection between Hinduism and nature with a reference to Hindu scriptures that can be used as a sacred instrument to prevent climate change. Now, of course, central to the Hindu faith is the spiritual principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, and that's Sanskrit for the world is one family. It's also the motto of the South African Hindu Mahasabha. And this particular principle is premised on the ideology that humans and the environment are one. Hindus believe that every element of the natural world is an element of the divine. This is evident in our religious texts, rituals, deity systems, classical dance performances, and meditative practices. And we'll look at that throughout the presentation. I'll also cover some ecological challenges faced in South Africa, because I am also an environmental scientist, and I'm currently looking at disaster management research at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I understand it's the Post COP26 discussion, and I just thought I'd take this excerpt from the President-designate, Mr. Sharma, no relation, and I think he spelled out very clearly what the geothermal maxima of 1.5 degrees was, and his definition, where he said, the science dictates that by the next half of this century, which is not so long from now, we should be producing less carbon than we are extracting from the atmosphere. And that is really what the definition of net zero means. In terms of South Africa, I also work with the KwaZulu-Natal Climate Change and Sustainable Development Council. So South Africa does play a role in its nationally determined updated contribution on policies to do with the Paris Agreement, to do with climate change. And one of the areas that we as South Africa need to play a bigger role is in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, right? Now, I did mention that this presentation was about religion and climate change and nature. So I'm just going to start you off as to what we believe from the cosmos as Hindus. And you'll notice that in the Vedas, our Vedas are the highest, it's the highest spiritual authority in Hinduism. It is the spiritual authority of all other derivative scriptures, such as the Itihasas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, and the Mahabharata and Ramayana, where the sacred lessons inscribed in those scriptures all conform to that of the Vedas. And why is that important? Because the Vedas are based on the laws of the universe. Okay, you'll find that Hindus, we have our own Hindu calendar that follows a lunar cycle. So we do everything when it comes to observations, rituals, marriage dates, based on astrological calculations to do with the cosmos, with the universe, with the moon, etc. So this plays a very, very great role because we have a very deep reverence for all life forms and all forms of the environment. Remember, outer space is also considered to be an environment. And I say this because you'll note as being, in association with many faith-based organizations, Hindus always start off their prayer with Om, because we believe that when the great rishis who were spiritual scientists, they had the ability to merge their identity with the identity of the divine. And that, we believe, was the first sound resonating and vibrating in the universe. That is why we start off our prayer that way. So that is the extent to which we revere these different forms of the environment. And of course, extensive reference made to the sun, moon in the Vedas, and I will take you through that throughout the presentation. Remember, we talk about the greenhouse effect, and I don't need to tell everybody here what that is. I'm sure all of you are aware of it from conferences, scientific reports, school, university, news, etc., and various civil society, community-based and faith-based organizations like this. And as I did make the statement earlier, this is where we as South Africa need to, look at reducing our emissions. Greenhouse effect, of course, we, emit all these greenhouse gases. They trap the heat and they increase the temperature, which is why in COP26, we decided to keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius. But I just also want to remind you, because I'm also a geology student, that the greenhouse effect is not the only effect that is going to be a challenge for us. The Earth, in relation to the sun or its solar sources, also undergoes various cycles, okay? So it's geological or orbital cycles, and I put it there on the right-hand side. And you'll see that every couple of thousand years, the Earth's orbit shape changes. So that means that there is going to be a time, we refer to this as perihelion, where the Earth is going to be nearer to the sun than normal, but it's a couple thousand year cycle. But it's something for us to be mindful of, that there are other factors, orbital factors, cosmic factors, geological factors at play, rather than only just the greenhouse effect. So it's the greenhouse effect in conjunction with these other geological effects. So when the Earth is closer to the sun, in that cycle, we will naturally be expecting a temperature increase. And if we don't reduce our geothermal maxima and our greenhouse effect, then we will exacerbate this process and then turn it from a natural one into an unnatural one, which is exactly what's happening. Okay, then one of the other Milankovitch cycles is the Obliquity Cycle. So it's just a change in, or a wobble in the axis of the Earth. You'll see the axis of the Earth changes its angle from time to time, and that facilitates a further contrast of seasons. So you'll find very hot seasons. You'll find things taking place, heat events taking place where they never took place before, etc. And that's just because of wobble in the Earth axis, 41,000 year cycle. And then the last one there is, tilted, the precession, which is tilted away from the sun at aphelion. So when it's not in the perihelion phase. So when the Earth tilts to a particular area, or the axis tilts to a particular area, then solar radiation in various parts of the planet will affect the El Nino, La Nina cycles, the greenhouse effect. So the point of this is to show you that we are not only being challenged by a greenhouse effect, we are challenged by many geological and cosmological effects, right? So that's something that I want us to be aware of as environmentalists, whether you are, coming from a faith-based organization or not. And of course, the biggest problem leading to all of this is pollution. Okay, our biggest challenge, not just in South Africa, all over the world. And you'll find that when I cover and go through the challenges of South Africa, you'll find South Africa is no different to what's going on everywhere else. Of course, fossil fuels is the big one. Biocidal products and toxic substances. And, I know Mrs. Odongo and Dr. Shiva made extensive reference to this. And developing countries, where does that leave us then in the context of this? Where does that leave people who are relying on the environment for their economic livelihoods? And remember, subsistence farming is a very significant and important thing for agriculturalists here in South Africa. So just going to take a quick look at some of the ecological challenges. This was given to us these statistics were given to us by the World Health Organization. I think it was 2018 or 2019. They took 1,600 cities across the world and, looked at their pollution levels, their pollution exposure. I think what was significant, given that it was 1,600 cities being surveyed, South Africa ranked 30th in the world for bad air quality. And I actually found that quite shocking that we were 30th. That's quite high, right? And Johannesburg was in the top 100 of those 1,600 cities that we surveyed. So it gives you a very harsh reality in South Africa that if we do not pay attention to sustainable development and the various climate adaptation and mitigation strategies as enforced by policy frameworks, then we are heading for trouble. I don't believe that we will not meet our goals if we start right now, but this is more urgent than ever. And what also became quite significant from the survey is that the Highveld and the Vaal Triangle became priority areas as well. So it's something that we really need to look at. Of course, in South Africa, and this is our projected energy mix by 2050, one of our areas where we are working very, very positively is in the renewable energy sector. So there's a considerable amount of energy coming from the solar and pneumatic or the wind systems. And we're going to take a look at the map just now. And so you'll see that we are planning to go half, more than half, so 56.7% of solar plants, etc., rooftop solar, and the rest you can see here, which are in smaller amounts. So just to get a perspective on this, so to let you know what's happening in South Africa, and this was taken in 2017, you see an extensive coverage of solar voltaic energy in the Northern Cape, and of course onshore wind or pneumatic energy sources, renewable energy sources in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, smaller presence of hydropower and biomass and small hydro from the Free State. And so it's very good to know that we are taking this turn in terms of South Africa, but there is a lot more work that needs to be done. Remember here with South Africa, and this is one of the reasons we were ranked so high in that survey of 1,600 cities, is that according to the World Health Organization, our air quality guideline target is set at 20 micrometers per meter cube, okay? However, we as South Africa have set our own national standards for particulate matter, and we are doing a threshold that is double what the World Health Organization has recommended. So a lot of the work from these sort of agreements and these discussions at the global level are fine, but to implement them at the national and local level, you can see that becomes more difficult. And it really, in my experience as a researcher, environmental researcher, and specifically looking at environmental justice and disaster management, shows us this sort of relationship between a particular political and corporate elite. Okay, so we can see what the situation in Cape Town is there with, again, the particulate particles being above what the World Health Organization is. Look at the Highveld area, and that was why it was priority. Look at Johannesburg, again, being higher than what South Africa has even set and what the World Health Organization said. So these were the cities that appeared as priority or as high-ranking cities in that survey. And so this then gives us a perspective as to how to act as South Africans. Our other big problem, so that was air pollution, right? So solid waste management, in particular plastic, okay? How do you not work without plastic? When you go into airports, everything is plastic. In the airplane, everything is plastic. At your house, when you're using lunch tins and certain bottles, etc., it's all plastic. Restaurants, etc., using plastic. How do we work towards something more sustainable? And obviously, plastic has become a very sort of affordable and convenient way of life. So you can see here polymer consumption by our market sector in South Africa. Packaging takes up 53%. Building and construction, agriculture, electronics, automotive, and other will then be referring to things like electricity, chairs, desks for kids, all your other plastic items that you know that you have at home. But again, the picture just next to the graphic here, the pie chart here, is from Plastics SA in 2018. And really speaking, South Africa does do quite well in recycling. But like I say, it's not enough. It tells us that in 2018, there was an input recycling rate of 46.3%. And by the end of that year, the plastics recycling saved was the equivalent emissions of 51,200 cars. So there is work being done. But again, it's a challenge. It really is a challenge, and it's not the only form of pollution that is against us here. So you'll see what the situation is in the Cape, in South Africa. Although we are doing as well as Plastics SA is doing for our recycling. I don't know how many of us are recycling at home. I know I do. I have the different color bags at home where I put my plastic or put my cardboard, etc. How many of us are doing that? And I don't know, whether people underestimate that. And remember, when we talk about reusing and recycling at home, it comes across as something very simple, but it really can make such a big difference. And we saw with the coronavirus pandemic, when everybody had to conform to the laws and stay at home, we saw a number of species able to replenish their population, species that were almost going extinct, now no longer going extinct. And we see here the South African situation. You see the sea turtle that was ingested or entangled. This LV was saved by the aquarium team after having a whole plastic bag pulled out of its throat. Now, what I want to remind everybody, when you're using your plastic bags or when you're purchasing plastic bags and plastic in particular is made of a substance called polyethylene. Polyethylene cannot break down. And then of course, LV and many turtles like LV think that it's a jellyfish and go to consume this. And this is what you find. And that's why so many of our sea turtle populations are being endangered. Very, very sad. And hopefully we can work towards this, which is why I say it's lovely and beautiful to write everything in policy, but the implementation is another factor. Of course, as well the situation with petrochemical production in South Africa, technological disasters, etc., and what's going on in South Durban. You will remember what the environmental justice mobilizations and organizations that came together to stop companies or industrial corporates like Engen and Shell, from destroying the environment. I think what I want to show people is that, look, the statistics are clear. Millions of people around the world are getting killed by pollution. In South Africa, the World Health Organization estimates that air pollution kills at least 20,000 people per year. That's a shocking statistic and something that could so easily be prevented. In South Durban, schools in the refineries having to endure the effects of that noxious activity had one of the highest asthma rates in the world. Similar situation in Johannesburg with the city mines and dumps, residents inhaling toxic dust, and with the mining areas, the inhalation of radon is leading to cancer, etc. And then I've pulled out, and there we go, Eskom, and what's happening with load shedding at the moment, and the power plants. And this is where I bring in this concept of, the political and corporate elites then deciding what's right and what's wrong, despite the fact that we have international laws in place and national laws in place. Here we go. It says that these companies have been given exemptions to circumvent the law requiring measures to reduce the air pollution. And taken from the UNEP Geo6 report, warns us that urgent action at an unprecedented scale is necessary to reverse the situation. So, as Dr. Shiva said and Mrs. Odongo in the earlier presentations, the time is now. And we saw what we could do when we mobilize. And this excerpt taken from UNEP, the Geo6 report, tells us that we are producing things where we don't even understand the damage of what we are producing, and we don't even know how to remediate it. So, going on in the South African situation, but drawing on scripture and how we can use scripture as an instrumental tool to combat the situation. is really significant. And this is where I want to start. Out of COP21, earlier before, the previous COP conferences, came the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change. And it was an initiative of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, the Bhumi Project in partnership with the Hindu American Foundation, and Breathe Faith, and our voices came together to bring this idea of using what our scriptures, the sacred lessons our scriptures have taught us, to remember the value of the environment. Okay, and as I did speak to you, and there's direct excerpts taken from the Hindu Declaration. Earth-friendly living, personal frugality, lower power consumption, etc. Embracing the notion of the world being one family and living in harmony and using what the lessons have taught us to prevent climate change. I don't see why we are not getting there as fast as we should. If we implement everything from a faith-based level and as well as a governance level, there shouldn't be an issue. These are also excerpts taken from the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change, again telling us that it's our duty to protect the environment, that climate change causes suffering, pain, and violence, and that we don't want to use our natural resources in an unsustainable manner. We don't want to further this pain. And then, of course, reminding us to adopt a plant-based diet in the last excerpt there, because it takes the least environmental impact. And remember, vegetarianism is something that is encouraged in Hinduism. Doing all this will help maintain the ecological and cosmic order that we believe, Hindus belong to a cosmic web. Just very quickly, and if you're exposed to anything on Hinduism, you'll know that we have a deity system in Sanatana Dharma, and we refer to the earth as our mother, because we believe that the mother is symbolic of absolute purity and divinity, and that one must respect their mother first. That's why we have this order that goes with our spiritual order: mother, father, teacher, God. That if you cannot respect your mother, if you cannot respect your father, if you cannot respect your teacher, you will not be able to appreciate and respect what God has given us, this world, this beautiful environment. Remember, we refer to the earth, and it's given there, Mother Earth, Bhumi Devi. We find the cow to be a very sacred animal. We refer to the cow as a mother, Gau Mata. We refer to the universe as a mother. That's how I started off my presentation. So we believe the universe is a spiritual deity and must be respected. And the river Ganges in India, we believe that she takes her form there, Mother Ganga. Different scriptures speak of elements of the universe and elements of the environment, and you'll find they're taken from the Artha Veda, talking about the earth again being a mother. Talking about in the Bhagavad Gita, we have conquered nature, therefore we are established in Brahman, meaning that when you conquer something, you detach yourself from it. You no longer need to depend upon it. You no longer need to exploit it, dominate it, and destroy it. We realize we are one with it. Then the next verse taken from the Upanishads, and God exists in the universe. I'm talking about God existing in all elements. The oceans, again, talking that they are treasure of wealth. We must not mistreat it, poison them, or pollute it. And just to this verses taken from the different Vedas, just reinforcing the fact that we must never forget what our scriptures teach us of the environment, not only the intrinsic value of this environment, but also the spiritual value of this environment. So, and again, respect for the environment, taken again from different excerpts of the different Vedas, just to tell you that we refer to these different elements, we talk about sustainability, and we should constantly remind ourselves of this. And I'm sure, as with every, the scriptures of every other faith, this is, available. But beyond just the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, which are the different scriptures used by Hindus, we also have specific practices in yoga that refer to the environment. So Surya Namaskar is a yogic practice or practice in yoga that is called the sun salutation. And if you look at step number 8 and step number 7, you'll see that it refers again to the environment, the mountain pose, the cobra pose. This is yoga that should be done facing the sun at sunrise in the morning, and it's believed to activate the endocrine system and balance the chakras, and of course then balance the mind, body, and soul. Again, giving our appreciation to the sun god, who is Surya, and greeting the sun, because Namaskar is a greeting and acknowledging the divinity of what the sun brings to us. Then we have Ayurveda, which is natural healing therapy, again, drawing from the scriptures, that using the natural environment in a sustainable way to heal oneself or to bring oneself to a balance. Because remember, we are one with the environment. Therefore, we return to the environment for balance. And this is lovely because I feel it ties in quite nicely with the African traditional medicine and healing, and brings us back to the notion of indigenous knowledge systems. Okay, remember, when we write policies, public participation is the cornerstone of each policy. And I think what's so important in those policies when we're talking about the environment and remembering to return to the environment, we need to integrate indigenous knowledge systems, because these systems teach us how to return to the origin and encourage what I'd like to call peaceful coexistence. So this is something, I've done courses in Ayurveda, etc., where, it's about cleansing your body, this notion of giving up, anything that is extra than what is needed, from your food to the treatments that you've taken, again, to encourage balance in the mind, balance in the body, and, health improvements. Remember, I did say that in Hinduism, there's an awareness of the great forces of nature. We have earth, water, fire, air, as well as various components of life. And we acknowledge plants, trees, forests, animals. And we know that they are bound to each other within this cosmic web of life. We honor nature and recognize it as intrinsic and spiritual. That is why when you look at our deities, on the left, the 9 deities are the 9 planets, or I like to refer to it as the 9 celestial bodies. And then to my right, I've got the squares there, the deities, who you'll see in every one of those pictures are adorned with flowers or an animal near them, or are animals themselves, like Lord Ganesh and Lord Hanuman. I remember growing up, a lot of people would say to me, but in your religion, you pray to animals, and they find that so strange. But we never found that strange as Hindus, because we believe that every element of nature is an element of God, including animals. And you will find that when Hindus are practicing their ritual,
maybe you can
I'm coming to the end.
Get to the, yes.
Yeah. Okay. You'll find that when we practice here, you'll find your natural things from nature used in virtually every ritual in Hinduism. So you'll see the notes, you'll see the presence of flowers, the presence of fires, etc. The presence of showing your child to the sun and the moon when they take their first solids. So different rituals that abide by the spiritual natural laws. Even if you look at our performing arts, Bharatanatyam and Indian classical dancing, we make a point of showing the environment and acting out through our different, dance mudras. We refer to them as mudras or dance moves, and you'll see half moon, peacock, the lotus flower. So I just want to end off by saying that, it's important that, although I'm making reference to scriptures here, and you'll notice what I spoke about in the South African context, it's important that we come together as the public sector. As the public sector, when it comes to faith-based organizations, which is exactly what SAFCEI is doing with community-based organizations, civil society organizations, because when we come together, we revolutionize. And if we revolutionize, we can really have brilliant environmental justice outcomes and solve these challenges presented to us by climate change. And the quote here by Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, the one who plants trees that will never sit in their shade, has at least started to understand the meaning of life. That is where we should be. That is what we should encourage And that is what we should be teaching our youth. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone for listening to my presentation. And I hope that you learned a little bit more about the Hindu faith and our stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tash, for the presentation. And in the interest of time, we will not ask people to ask questions now, but we'll move straight on to our next presentation that is coming from Valériane. So I would like to invite Valériane to come through and give us your presentation, please. Thanks.
Hello, thank you for inviting me, and really wonderful to hear everyone. It's an amount of knowledge that's really incredible. Could I ask to be able to share my screen in order to share my presentation, please? Thank you very much. So I have two presentations that will be what I would like to share with you. One is the thing I have been asked, which is the COP26 and beyond adaptation schemes. First, I thought it would be good to share UNFCCC parties addressing adaptation, because it's not something we always have in mind. Assess impacts, vulnerability, and risks, plan for adaptation, implement adaptation measures, monitor and evaluate adaptation, raising awareness and ambition, which is something, if you look at it, that faith-based organizations are really doing, providing political space for engagement, sharing information, knowledge, and guidance, strengthening technical and institutional capacities, facilitating the provision of financial and technological support, engaging a wider range of stakeholders. So we'll see later in my presentation that this is part of what the FBOs are doing. So for the UNFCCC, adaptation refers to adjustments in ecological, social, or economical systems in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli and their effects or impacts. And this is what we've been talking about this morning a lot. Changes in processes, practices, and structures to moderate potential damages. And I think that's where we really need to pay a lot of attention. Countries and communities need to develop adaptation solutions and implement action to respond to the impact of climate change that are already happening, as well as prepare for future impacts. I would like to share what it is that the COP26 decisions on adaptation have been. On natural adaptation plans, as you know, within the UNFCCC, at the COPs, you have many actual bodies that are looking at adaptation. So the national adaptation plans is one of the biggest thing to look at, because that's where things are happening. Along with the NDCs, there is the urgency of scaling up action and support, including finance, capacity building, and technology transfer to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, reduce vulnerability to climate change in line with the best available science, taking into account the priorities and needs of developing countries, parties, and invite the IPCC to present to COP27 their findings. Now, on adaptation finance, The COP urges developed countries, parties to urgently and significantly scale up their provision of climate finance. And as we have been seeing with Vandana Shiva earlier, this is one of the things where we really have a big problem at the moment. Technologies of transfer and capacity building for adaptation to respond to the needs of developing countries, parties, as part of a global effort, including for the formulation and implementation on NAPs. So NAPs means National Adaptation Plans. And I think this is one of the places where FBOs, faith-based organizations, can really try and push their governments to work on the national adaptation plans. And it calls upon multilateral development banks and other institutions and the private sector to enhance finance mobilization to deliver the scale of resources needed to achieve climate plans, particularly for adaptation, and encourage parties to continue to explore innovative approaches and instruments for mobilizing finance for adaptation from private sources. And I think this is one of the spaces where there is currently a group of faith-based organizations trying to see what kind of money we as faith-based organizations that are not going to be going through governments and through private sector can happen. But at the same time, I think we really need to try and connect. So on climate matters, on adaptation, which is another body working report of the Adaptation Committee of 21 and the global goal on adaptation. The report of the Adaptation Committee for 21 was discussed in conjunction with the 2019 and 2020 reports. And these discussions are summarized under COP, the discussion on the GGA convened in ministerial-led consultation. On Saturday, 13 November, the CMA adopted 2 resolutions on the goal. It establishes the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programs on the GGA, and on the climate matters related to adaptation, adopted 2 decisions in its decision on the committee's report. Requests the Adaptation Committee with the engagement of IPCC working group to expedite its work on developing the draft supplementary guidance for voluntary use by parties in communicating adaptation information, and on producing a technical paper on methodologies for assessing adaptation needs, and encourages parties to make available sufficient resources for the successful and timely implementation of the flexible work plan of the Adaptation Committee for 22-24. And the COP also noted how the lack of common definition impacts the ability to track and assess climate finance, which in a way, as Vandana was saying, is one of the amazing snake eating its tail. While other parties mentioned that a single definition would not be useful, and also noted that the operational definitions in use generally reflect common understanding of what's considered mitigation and adaptation finance, notes that NDCs from 153 parties, including 4,274 needs, with 1,782 posted needs, identify across the 78 NDCs, so the national determined contributions, cumulative amount of US dollars 5.8 to 5.9 trillion through to 2030. And that also developing countries parties identified more adaptation needs than mitigation needs, more costs were identified for the latter, which may not imply that mitigation needs are greater, but rather there is a lack of available data, tools, and capacity for assessing adaptation needs. And it expressed that concern that the first NDR does not have disaggregated data for the small island states. It emphasizes that there is a particular challenge in deriving cost estimates for climate adaptation and enhancing resilient needs. And this context, deriving and cost estimates for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage needs. I find it very important to realize that, because it's part maybe where we can try and find universities to help on this kind of work. So the COP decides on the steps necessary for the SBI, so one of the bodies of the COP, to initiate the assessment of progress in the process to formulate and implement the National Adaptive Plan, and to make recommendations for consideration and adoptions by the COP in 24. These steps include inviting submissions on progress towards achieving the objectives of the NAP process, requesting the Secretariat to prepare a synthesis report on such progress, and requesting the LEG in collaboration with the Adaptation Committee to provide a summary of such progress. And it decides that the assessment should take into account all the guiding principle of NAP process, and requests the constituted bodies and program under the convention to continue providing information on the activities relevant to the NAP process through the annual progress report on NAPs. Then I wanted to give you a bit of a look at what the IPCC Working Group 26 report is saying. The report recognizes the value of diverse forms of knowledge, such as scientific as well as indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, in understanding and evaluating climate adaptation processes and actions to reduce risks from human-induced climate change. The report, the sixth report, highlights adaptation solutions which are effective, feasible, and conform to principles of justice. The term climate justice generally includes three principles: distributive justice, which refers to the allocation of burdens and benefits amongst individuals, nations, and generations. And this is something Francesca really mentioned. Things don't go to people who most need them. Money doesn't go to people who most need it. Procedural justice, which refers to who decides and participates in decision-making. Recognition, which entails basic respect and robust engagement with and fair consideration of diverse cultures and perspectives. So this is, in a snapshot, what I feel the COP and the IPCC have been mentioning. It's a report of 3,000 pages, so there is a lot more to look at. There is summary for countries that you can have a look at. It's a lot shorter. So I just wanted to put the Interface Liaison Committee, which is a committee for which Henrik Grape from WCC and myself, we are the co-chairs. We were established as a special group under the UNFCCC during the 2013 conference of the parties to support the informal gathering of faith-based organizations. As you know, we're not a major group, but we are actively engaged in the UNFCCC. The ILC works as a platform for faith-based organizations to facilitate dialogue and action. The ILC meets during the annual UN climate negotiations and regularly online. We are creating webinars. We are also collaborating on faith advocacy for climate ambition, embracing all the pillars of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement: mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and finance. And here I wanted you to have a look at pictures, because I think they speak to the heart. The first picture on the top is the event that was organized on the one main space square place in Glasgow, where we had all the different faith leaders who came and spoke very eloquently and prayed and meditated together for the success of the COP. This happened just before. And underneath you have also one of the things that we are organizing, which is called the Telenor Dialogues. These Telenor word comes from Fiji. It is the way that the indigenous peoples call for a Telenor dialogue when we are facing with unprecedented difficulties. And in a dialogue, everyone speaks. So we are doing these Telenor dialogues, engaging panelists that are experts to inform all the faith-based organizations. There was over about 300 people this year. We had one the year before in Madrid, which was more complicated to organize because we only had 1 month to make it happen. And we also have groups. So each person who is present has the possibility to speak, to reflect, to bring solutions, which I think is a very important thing to do from faith-based organizations. And I wanted to finish with this particular picture, because I believe that we are faced with unprecedented complications at the moment. And I would like to speak a few things from my notes. I will stop the sharing if I find how to. I wanted to stop the sharing. And I wanted to tell you that from the Brahma Kumaris, we have been working, one of my pet projects has been working with the farmers. Farmers in India, as Vandana was mentioning, have been really in a very difficult situation with the inability to buy seeds that weren't made by Monsanto. And farmers were committing suicide in a big way. And some farmers who were themselves practicing meditation decided to start doing yogic agriculture. And they have been doing amazing work empowering their plants through yoga, as well as empowering their family, their community, finding pride in their work, and then sharing the seeds and plants that they have been grown that were and are actually far richer in food and nutrients. And farmers are sharing this information with the other farmers. We have also been working a lot in sharing information around the different solutions that there is, doing tree planting, water management, climate education, spiritual education around the eco attitude, providing people with the will to do lifestyle changes. As the presented person was saying, vegetarianism being one of the ways we can really reduce our carbon impact. Also, resilience is one of the things that I think our FBOs are really needing to work on very deeply, empowering people through spirituality, because we are facing and are going to face such despair. So we need to see how we can give access to spiritual resources and skills. One of the things we do also through meditation is serving the elements, having an understanding of our relationship with matter that is completely different, and giving time and meditation and having a gratitude attitude. The ILC, so the Interfaith Liaison Committee, is meeting, showing up, that the different faiths come together for the earth and for the people of the earth, especially in a world that makes us believe that religions only divide and conduce to war. So through these Telenor Dialogues, through information, knowledge sharing, through coordinating the work of all the different faith-based organizations, and we bring the voices we have to the parties, the countries that are there. We're doing a lot of advocacy work, working towards just development around the topic of the depth around the concept of leaving no one behind, and fighting together against geoengineering and soil engineering. FBOs also represent the voice of moral and ethics, and one word that's never there, it's love and peace. That's what we need to bring back to the center of the table when we are addressing the current ecological crisis, having empathic positions, and when working on resolving the problems affecting people and the human and ecological consequences of climate change. Also, the concept of protecting the commons, I think, is a very essential one that would be related to protecting our earth and all the systems of our earth. We do that through prayer and meditation. Throughout the whole COP26, Bishop Philip Huggins and Ms. Sarwat Tasneem conducted an amazing platform where many people meditated for the climate, for good decisions. And this platform is going on towards COP27. Of course, FBOs work on humanitarian relief, and this is one of the essential things we can do. But also, as I was saying, spiritual resilience and chaplaincy work. Even at the COPs, there is so much tension. You can't imagine how much people are facing. I've seen negotiators cry. I've seen people really affected. It's so intense, and what we are facing is so dramatic. We also write statements together, write petitions, and out of the Telenor Dialogue, we created a call that was delivered to the UNFCCC Secretariat's Director. We also, as FBO, need to work on health adaptation, promoting the perspectives and knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities, because they know about adaptation. And also through our work in Brahma Kumaris with the yogic farming, we can see the seeds are resilient when they are natural. Loss and damage is also something that my friend will talk about next, but I think it's essential for us to continue looking at it. Climate justice is really the word under which we are all the banner of our work, making sure also we're not facilitating greenwashing, I think is important as faith-based organizations. We must still look at finance, find alternative way to create solutions through divesting, through awareness raising in our different countries and communities, but also remember human rights, intergenerational rights, the rights of young people and those who haven't yet been born, but also remember the old people, their wisdom, their well-being. And of course, at the center of it all, Brahma Kumaris, a women's organization, remember women's-led organization, women's right, because these are at the center of a transformative solutions. And we need to find a transformative economic solutions, collaborating with local governments, with unions, with workers, with communities, in whatever way they are being there in our different countries. And we need to also learn how to work with other faith-based organizations and other NGOs, strengthening the links between the global North and the global South. And empowering the most vulnerable, I think, is at the center of our work, exactly in terms of capacity building. And we have to know how to help stop thinking in silos, because that's what the UN has a tendency to do, looking at only human rights, only climate change, only environment, only what's going to happen next week in Geneva, the conference on biodiversity. But all this is totally linked. So we have the capacity to show the links that are there. And I wanted to share with you also that there is a special rapporteur on climate change and human rights who will be nominated this month by the Human Rights Council. So sharing information with him will allow your basic information to come to the Human Rights Council. And of course, for the spiritual work, we need to help people make meaning of what's happening. We need to help caring for the populations through spiritual empowerment. We need to care for the well-being of people and helping them deal with. I'm just over in 2 words.
Please,
yeah, I'm almost finished. Helping people to deal with grief and the center stage of hope and inner adaptation, and the power to face death and collapse, and the power to create solutions is something we really need to look into. And mitigation, of course, through promoting renewable energies, which is one of the things we've been doing at the BKs, promoting and doing solar energy and sharing the know-how. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Valériane, and for all the insights about the COP and what actually goes on in the, and also the tips and the areas where we can actually go into, particularly when we're looking at the issues of mitigation and versus adaptation, as well as maybe the spaces that we can actually make use of during the COP27 in Egypt. So thank you very much for that. Because of our time, we want to move on and squeeze in our last presentation. And I would like to invite Shannon Shaw from the Faith for Climate to actually come on board and also share with us the issues surrounding loss and damage. Over to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Gabriel. Shalom, salam, shanti, and peace to all of you. So thanks again, Gabriel, Francesca, and to all the wonderful team at SAFCEI for inviting me to speak to you all today on behalf of my organization, Faith for the Climate, on the topic of loss and damage. It's really nice as well because Faith for the Climate and SAFCEI are both parts of the Green Faith International family. So it's a real honor to be here with all of you today in camaraderie, solidarity, and fellowship and faith. And I've also been really inspired and learned a lot from the presentations that have come before mine. So I'll try to keep this as short as possible in the interest of time. Before I start my slide share, I will put a link to my slides. I've just put that in the chat box. So you can all click on that. You will have access to my slides. You can follow it at your own pace. You can download it for your own use. It's fine. But for the interest of today, I will also start sharing my slides now. Right. So let me give you some context about what I'm going to address by sharing some background with you. So I am Malaysian by birth and nationality. I am a Muslim, and I came to the UK in 2010 to pursue my postgraduate studies in religious studies. I have a PhD in the sociology of religion, and I have since relocated to the UK. I started my current post at Faith for the Climate in March 2020, just a couple of weeks before the UK locked down because of the global coronavirus pandemic. Now, Faith for the Climate has and always has had a really tiny staff team. At the moment, it's just me and my colleague, Roche Lau. We both work part-time, but as a small team, we try to equip, inspire, and encourage faith-inspired actions nationwide across the UK. And we welcome all faiths and all schools or denominations within different faiths in the UK. So when I first came into this post, I knew quite a lot about environmental justice and social justice, but I knew very little about COP, let alone about loss and damage as a specific area of negotiation. So when it was confirmed that the UK would host COP26, Faith for the Climate began chairing a coalition of UK faith groups that were interested in mobilizing climate action in the lead up to COP26. And my goodness, it was a learning journey. It was exciting and very intimidating for me as well, because this was going to be my first ever COP. Anyway, this coalition that we started chairing included people who were very experienced at COP and people like me, for whom it was a first experience. But we all started working together, and it's an informal coalition, but it became known as Make COP Count. We decided to give it a name and give it an image. And in consultation amongst ourselves, and with feedback from our partners within the UK and internationally, including in many parts of the Global South, we decided to focus on two advocacy priorities to put to the UK government from a faith perspective. So the first was to ask for new and additional finance for loss and damage. And the second was to end the use of all public money to subsidize fossil fuels. Now, the credit for the development of these advocacy priorities must go to one of our key stakeholders and partners, Quakers in Britain. But in the lead up to Glasgow, we all worked very closely together on these priorities as the Make COP Count Coalition. Now, in Glasgow, here are some pictures. Faith for the Climate had an interfaith exhibition and an interfaith panel in the Green Zone. But I personally did not have accreditation to attend the Blue Zone, where the official negotiations were happening. So when Valériane was talking about the negotiators who get really stressed and can sometimes break down in the middle of negotiations, that was happening. I just didn't see it because I wasn't there. I didn't have accreditation to attend that. But in Glasgow, physically, what I and my small team did was we supported many of the civil society actions on loss and damage in the spaces outside the official UN zones. And I also coordinated a signal channel dedicated to loss and damage to communicate with the activists, the international activists who are working on loss and damage within the Blue Zone. So there was that communication that we had inside and outside on loss and damage. So this is the background and the context for what I am sharing with you today. So let's move on to loss and damage properly. Just to refresh your memory, you've heard some of these terms used already today, but just to refresh your memory, under the Paris Agreement, there are three pillars of climate action. So the first is mitigation, which is basically cutting carbon emissions to avoid global heating as much as possible. So this includes things like ending deforestation, ending fossil fuels, and so on. The second pillar, as Valériane has presented, is adaptation. And this includes things like changing our buildings, changing the way we use our land, changing the way we use transport, and so on, so that we can live and adapt to the impacts of climate change. The final pillar is loss and damage. And loss and damage describes impacts that are so severe that societies cannot adapt to them and that we cannot change just by mitigation. So this includes things that are changing slowly, like sea level rises, and also extreme weather events like severe hurricanes and droughts. And this picture will be one that many of you are familiar with. This is a picture of Mozambique after it was hit with Cyclone Idai in 2019. And I really apologize if it causes distress, but I think we need to see what loss and damage actually means and what it does to people and planet. Now, all of these pillars are vital, and they all need political will and adequate financing. But the issue of loss and damage is particularly fraught because it has historically been blocked or watered down by big polluters and rich nations, including the UK government. Now, a little more background. Many of you will know that at COP19 in Warsaw, Poland in 2013, the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage was established. And then at COP25 in Madrid in 2019, the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage was established to implement the Warsaw International Mechanism. So the Warsaw Mechanism is the larger framework mechanism within the UN that needs to handle loss and damage, in terms of raising awareness, governance, finance, technical assistance, and so on. The Santiago Network is a bit narrower. It's about catalyzing technical assistance of organizations, bodies, networks, and experts. So this is just a brief background of what's already there within the official UN bureaucracy. So to understand the outcomes of negotiations on loss and damage at COP26, I think now it's important to lay out what global civil society groups and the most affected countries in the global south were calling for. So for example, this Santiago Network was set up in 2019, but it hasn't actually been operationalized yet. So at COP26, civil society groups and many global south governments were pushing for clarity on how it would function, what would be its terms of reference, what would be its remit, and so on. But the global north delegations just wanted a basic outline of the process for the Santiago Network. They said we can leave the details of the functions and everything later on. So there were these things happening behind the scenes at COP. So to keep it quite short, in the interest of time, just a summary of the negotiations, what happened on loss and damage. So in the second week of COP26, this was when all the debate on loss and damage started ramping up. And developing countries, led by the G7, the small island states, sorry, not G7, G77, the small island states and China, they introduced a proposal for a Glasgow loss and damage facility that would be established to provide finance for loss and damage to vulnerable countries in the global south. Now, this proposal was blocked by global north negotiators, but as a compromise, the Glasgow Dialogue on loss and damage was established. So this was a political compromise, right? So there is no facility yet to provide finance for loss and damage. So in other words, the questions of who runs this facility, how is it governed, how does the process work, how is the money going to be obtained, who does it go to, and even human rights safeguards on loss and damage, none of these have been decided yet. Because I think you've heard from, especially Dr. Vandana Shiva made this very clear, the UN mechanisms to address the climate crisis are being held hostage by neoliberal capitalism and neo-colonialism. That's the simple answer. But now I want to tell you a more uplifting story. I know this is all hugely disheartening, but this is the precise reason why the UK faith groups that we've worked with have decided to focus on loss and damage, because it was a way for us as groups based in the global north to demonstrate solidarity for global climate justice. And it's been quite a journey, as I said. So when Make COP Count finalized these priorities in April 2021, there was actually still quite low interest and low awareness on loss and damage. People didn't even know what it was. And this includes from the faith communities that we work with, even within our own network. You know, the media didn't really know what loss and damage was. And the COP26 presidency of the UK was not really interested in taking this forward, but we pushed, along with other NGOs, we pushed. And then in the following months, what we saw was the issue of loss and damage started climbing up the agenda of the UK COP26 presidency. So it achieved very high political visibility in the lead up to Glasgow. And then on the 23rd of September, lots of different networks around the world, including the UK, helped to coordinate and launch the Loss and Damage Awareness Day. And you can see the link to it. There's a video that comes with it, which I really encourage you all to watch. It features Vanessa Nakate, the climate activist from Uganda. So in other words, these are all pictures from COP, pictures that I took personally or that we were involved with in supporting directly at COP. So in short, loss and damage eventually achieved incredible visibility at COP26 because of civil society pressure and mobilization and coordination within the UK and also in collaboration with activists and delegates from the majority world in the Global South. And then media coverage also started to highlight loss and damage as the unjustly neglected issue of climate justice. And there were also some other noteworthy developments. Scotland became the first global north jurisdiction to pledge actual money for loss and damage. So even though the amount that was pledged was quite tiny, they pledged £2 million, this was still a political and symbolic act. It was really significant. And the UK Labour Party at COP also came out publicly in support of civil society calls for loss and damage financing. So as a result of all these developments, loss and damage has skyrocketed up the civil society agenda in the UK and worldwide, including amongst faith groups. I've mentioned the Make COP Count coalition already. We will continue with loss and damage as one of our priorities this year, and we will work closely with other coalitions such as Make Polluters Pay, which focuses on loss and damage and includes groups such as the Quakers and Christian Aid. And Christian Aid, in particular, is making loss and damage one of their main priorities this year as well. So watch this space for Christian Aid's work. Now, Gabriel also invited me to talk a little bit about the impacts of loss and damage on climate hotspots. Unfortunately, I'm not really an expert on climate hotspots, but perhaps I can tackle this question in a different way from my vantage point as a minority faith climate activist who's based in a rich country, the UK. So let me address one of the recurring challenges I hear from many other faith activists in a UK context and my response to them. So one of the things I hear now from several church-based activists in England, you know, whether they're Anglican or Methodist or Roman Catholic, you know, a lot of them say that the issue of loss and damage is too technical, it's too difficult for their congregations to grasp. So they say this makes it difficult for them to pursue it alongside the other church actions that they are organizing on climate change, such as their campaigns to achieve net zero. Now, I largely agree that loss and damage finance is a very technical issue, and the negotiations around it are incredibly complex and confusing. I've been there, I know what that's like. But then I think that other aspects of climate negotiations are also complicated and confusing, including concepts like net zero. To me, the issue of loss and damage is actually really simple. It's basically a human story. I showed you that picture of Cyclone Ida in Mozambique. It is a human story of how and why the people who are least responsible for causing the climate crisis are suffering the most from its impacts. This is the simple fact that allowed me to grasp the concept of loss and damage and to learn about it. And when I speak to activists and frontline communities from the majority world, from Fiji to Jamaica, to Kenya, to Bangladesh, to Pakistan, to the Philippines, they don't find this difficult to grasp either. So I sometimes wonder when we use technical terms like climate hotspots, I think they're important. We need to understand them. But I wonder if we keep focusing on the technical terms, if we are obfuscating this very simple and stark reality of injustice. So in other words, I think what is difficult to grasp is not the technicalities, but the politics of loss and damage, especially in global North contexts. Because it is impossible to talk about loss and damage without talking about historical responsibility, without talking about extractive neoliberal capitalism, without talking about historical colonialism or contemporary neocolonialism. It is also impossible to talk about loss and damage without being honest about the corruption, the authoritarianism, and the questionable human rights track records amongst some post-colonial regimes in the global South. This is a reality. So I think quite apart from the sheer story of devastation and human suffering covered by these three simple words, loss and damage, it is this political finger-pointing, foot-dragging, gaslighting, and denial that is so energy-sapping and frightening. But this is why I think it is even more important to talk about loss and damage, especially amongst faith communities. It is incumbent upon us to nurture and advance this conversation together with genuine self-reflection and repentance within a robust, gentle, loving, and yet courageous and firm moral and spiritual framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shannon, and for all those revelations in terms of what is actually going on. And unfortunately that we do have such a very, very complicated process at the UN, which denies people the opportunity to freely share the kind of difficulties that they are going through. But thanks for the tips in terms of actually bringing this to the fore and all the work that has gone on with the organizations on particularly looking at COP26 that has actually brought the issue of loss and damage as an issue that we need to talk about. From the South, we have lived it. We know where it affects and who it affects and how they get affected. So we'd also want to encourage everybody in the room to pick this up and actually make use of this the spaces that we have so that we may be able to take it further. Now we would want to quickly have your feedback from all the participants. So I would want to ask Tanzin to put up a Mentimeter, and may you please share with us any takeaways that you've got from this particular meeting, particularly on this call. So may I quickly invite Tanzin to put up the Mentimeter so that we can have about just 2 minutes of your time. Tanzin, may you please assist us with that? Okay, the link is in the chat box. May we please click on it and just give us a word or two of what it is that which you managed to take away from this particular meeting. That would then help us in terms of following up and working through it as the faith communities in Southern Africa. Tamsin, you may share the results, maybe so that we just have a quick summary of what we have now. Thank you very much. We see the issues that are coming up on the board, particularly that this was an informative meeting and that loss and damage are the things that we should be taking up. And the challenge with the corporate world that is taking over at the UN, we see of the engagement that is sought out, and also on the issue that we have lots of work that we will need to do in terms of the loss and damage, and then the faith communities working closer together. Let's keep this coming, and also are looking at the issue of adaptation, fossil fuels, and the ecological issues, and maybe the loss and damage which most people in the southern African communities have experienced. Let's keep our thoughts coming through. Thank you very much, and we will put this together, and I will actually be sharing that back with you as I see more words are coming through, but the issue of adaptation and loss and damage, as well as the issues of agroecology also coming on board. Thank you to everyone for this, and let's keep writing as much as possible, and you can even share this with us in terms of what it is that which we have taken away from this perspective, and then from then on you can work on it in our future collaborations. I want to actually wrap up this meeting and thanking everyone for being patient with us as we actually worked over the time that we had agreed to stop at 12 o'clock. Now, I would want a quick wrap up from, I've asked Francesca to just have a quick closing remarks for us, and then we will be done, and then we will make further announcement later. Francesca. Okay, and it seems Francesca is unable to come through on that, so I will just do a quick wrap up in terms of the work that we have gone through and the perspectives that have been shared today. Starting off from Dr. Vandana's presentation, where she feels that the UNFCCC processes have been captured by the big corporates, and that there are issues that are happening whilst we would have the open sharing and maybe the declarations that are made as the main declarations. But the key issues that we face are those that are made on the sidelines, which actually then provide the false solutions to the COP26 and all the other processes that we have. And maybe the call to the faith communities for the healing of the planet and actually removing the new ecological apartheid that we see now, letting the earth and its natural processes deal with the issues of cooling the earth. And maybe what also came up tops for me was the issues that surround the living and the dead carbon, and that we should be encouraged to let the dead carbon remain in the ground and promote the living carbon. Then we would also look at the issues that are shared by Tashmica in terms of having the faith communities take up the issues of adaptation seriously and are working from our different faith perspectives to actually push through the issues in our different communities, and also making even our different declarations when we have the COPs going, so that we give support to those that are leading the processes. And Leonida also added on the issues that different communities are suffering because of the adjustment that they have to make, particularly when we're looking at agriculture, an adaptation that is very costly to the ordinary people, and unfortunately that also have unfair issues surrounding it, particularly when we're looking at women suffering most out of these adaptation strategies that they would want to adopt, but because they are handicapped in their different communities, they may not be able to respond accordingly. And we also got an insight into some of the decisions that were made at COP26 in Glasgow from Valériane, who actually said the issues of common definitions is one that actually inhibits the progress that need to be made. And that from the South, we are talking more about adaptation needs than the mitigation needs. And within this, maybe, unfortunately, finance is not following adaptation, but is following on the issues of mitigation. And therefore, we need to keep on calling for climate justice, which is broken down into distributive justice, procedural justice, and also the recognition of all in terms of our different needs. And an encouragement for us to be part of the Telenor Dialogue that will bring about the climate justice. And finally, from Shannon, who mentioned the push that has actually been put across to the whole world in terms of the issues of loss and damage. Thank you very much for that. I think that was our last presentation. I want to thank all of you, particularly our presenters, for taking time to actually give us this world perspective on the issues that are actually happening around us, and particularly those that affect us in our different communities, particularly when we're looking at Southern Africa, where the hotspots of climate change are bringing disaster to our different communities. If we still have people who have questions, may you please forward them to us. If terms, you may put some of our emails on the chat box for any issues surrounding this call to be put in there, so that we may be able to respond. And we'll be following up on our presenters so that we can have all the presentations to share with all the participants. Thank you very much. I would like to call upon Reverend Ziramba from Zimbabwe to give us a closing prayer.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Reverend Edward Ziramba from Mosaic Council of Hope in Zimbabwe. Let us pray. We thank all Heavenly Father as we come to the end of this free and great online meeting on classes. Which meeting was meant to be a post COP26 discussion in preparation for COP27. Thank you for taking us through the key outcomes, insights, and reflections from the 26th National Framework Convention on Climate Conference of Parties. We thank you for every participant here present and for our panel of experts. We thank you, oh God, for our panel of experts who came from different parts of Southern Africa and from different faith communities, which panel was fully geared and ready to be used as climate justice instruments in your hand. Thank you for sending Dr. Shiva, Leonida, Tashmica, Valériane, and Shannon with challenging reflections and insights that will propel our zeal for climate justice as faith communities even higher as we look forward to COP27. May your divine presence continue to grace SAFCEI, the institution, and your servants in the climate justice ministry, Francisca, Gabriel, and the entire SAFCEI Secretariat. May you bless our partners in climate justice. We pray this in the mighty name of our Lord Jesus Christ, now and forever after. Amen.
Thank you, Revs Ramba, and would like to quickly take a photo of everybody who attended this meeting. So if you may, please open up your video so that we may take a photo and would like to ask Flo to take the photo.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Gabriel. Good afternoon, rather. I do see we have participants switching on their camera. I do also see some familiar faces. It's good to see you all. Because we have a lot of participants, I'll take the picture 3 times. I'm going to take the first portion and then also take the first one. So I'm going to take the first picture screenshot now. Just give me a second.
The smiles are drying up.
I just took the first one now, so the smiles can be on hold for a bit. And then I'm going to take another one just now. Okay, I'm going to take the second one now. Good to see you all. Okay, just took the second one, and then I'm going to take the last one now. Just almost done. Thank you very much to everyone that switched on their cameras and those who couldn't. It's still fine. Great to have you on the call with us. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone,
all good on my side, Gabriel. Gabriel, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, everyone. We do hope to meet again in our next call, and let's all take our parts in making sure that our world is a better place for us and future generations.
Thank you. Good day, everyone.
Bye. Thanks. Bye, everyone. God bless.